I think I'm going to start off with this opening slide, the Great Wave of Kanagawa. And the reason I've chosen this is because many have described open access as a tsunami, especially in terms of the rate and the pace of change. Many have talked about how publishers have been caught on the back foot with the rate of developments. And to be honest, I wouldn't disagree with that. But that said, I think that publishers over the past 12, 18 months have been taking an awful lot of steps to engage with open access, to embrace it and to really fit it in with our existing publication models. Just a quick caveat, I am of course speaking from the experiences of Taylor and Francis and Routledge. We are a large commercial academic press. However, we don't publish any journals in biomedical science, so I think that's an important point for you all to be aware of as the talk progresses. So, this is my overview. Really just to say that I had hoped for more than half an hour so I could regale you all in very minute detail about all of the intricacies that we've been grappling with, but perhaps you'll be relieved to hear that I only have 30 minutes. So I will be having a fairly light touch in some respects. I will be passing over points that some of the other speakers have already talked about, but perhaps we'll have time to bring those up either at the end of this presentation or in the panel session later. So there's been a lot of talk about the transition to open access, and that is perhaps something that I would slightly challenge. I'd actually think that, we like to say we live in the third age of publishing. So this is an age where we have the subscription model, which has obviously been in place for coming up to 300 years. We have the big deal or site license model, which was obviously introduced in the 1990s as a way to address rising content, rising subscription costs and decreasing library budgets. And now we have open access, a fairly new entry into the scene, really gaining in prevalence since the turn of the century. And at the moment, we are very much living in that mixed economy that's already been talked about this morning. And I would say that we feel that this is a state that's going to exist for some time to come. Of course, authors have always been the customers of publishers. I think what open access does, though, is it makes that relationship perhaps more direct, especially in terms of transactional nature. I'll be talking about that a little bit more later on. We've already heard about the impact, really, that the funders and the policymakers have had in terms of the development of open access, specifically around their mandates and their policies. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but suffice it to say that those mandates have really helped hasten the rate of change. Something that we hold to be true at TNF is that publishers need to offer choice to authors. We are, after all, a service industry. We are there to service the needs of the research community that we serve. And something that's very important and seems to become increasingly important, actually, is that we offer publication in trusted, reputable outlets. Authors know that their work is going to be peer-reviewed and it's going to be subjected to the appropriate scrutiny, regardless of what transaction occurs after acceptance. I hope not to harp on this point too much, but essentially something that we need to be very mindful of is the sustainability of our existing titles. We do publish, moving on to Didcot Power Station there, which is where our head office is based. We do publish some 1,800 journals, and the majority of those are legacy titles. They are 2/3 of which are in social sciences, arts and humanities. To put it into context, the average online subscription price for a quarterly journal in social sciences, arts and humanities is just under $500. The price for science and technology is just over $600. That subscription income that we generate is also supported by what we call third-party revenue. So we do make additional revenue downstream from selling content to third parties, from permissions, so on and so forth. So we are very keen to engage with open access, but we must make sure that we don't jeopardize the sustainability of our existing portfolio. We run each of our journals essentially as a separate business, so we want to make sure that they can all stand on their own feet. Obviously, we publish over 500 journals on behalf of society partners, and it is our responsibility as part of our relationship with those societies to make sure that those journals are healthy and will prosper for years to come. A little bit of background on our open access timeline. So back in 2003, we actually formalised our author rights policy, and that was making it clear to authors that in terms of their original manuscript, they could post that wherever they chose. We imposed no restriction on that posting. In terms of the author-accepted manuscript, again, posting of that version is permitted, though we do impose presently embargo periods of either 12 or 18 months, depending on the subject area. And that really is to protect the subscriptions to the journals which support effectively that green open access model. I'm just sort of skipping ahead a bullet point there because whilst talking about embargo periods, I think it's an appropriate time to bring up our zero embargo pilot, which is on our Library and Information Science Journals portfolio. So essentially, we started in 2011 a pilot where we'd actually said to authors publishing in those journals that they were able to post the accepted manuscript with no embargo applicable. The reason for us doing that was mostly really to gather data and see what the impact of that policy would have, not just in terms of subscription renewals, but also in usage and citation. 2 years on, we're just starting to get some data. We're in the process of analysing that, and I think that will be informing future decisions around green open access and specifically embargo periods. Our hybrid open access portfolio launched back in 2006. It's now known as Open Select. And every year we've included more and more titles in there, mostly really to offer authors the choice of publishing in as many outlets as possible, whether on an open access basis or a subscription basis. Our forays into the pure OA world have been fairly cautious thus far, I must admit, but in 2011 we launched our open portfolio, so a suite of journals with no subscription element, and we now have over 20 titles there. Now, I just want to put this into a little bit more context for you. I did mention earlier that we don't publish research in biomedical science. We have seen, in terms of content by publication year, we have seen that ramp up. I'm talking here about gold open access, but just to clarify, these are papers where we may or we may not have banked an article publishing charge, so we do include waived papers in this figure. So you'll see that there is a gradual rise there, but that notwithstanding, the annual proportion of that content is still less than 1% of total published articles. So a bit of food for thought there. Looking at the subject split, I'm sorry that the graphic's a little bit blurry, but we're quite interested to see that rather than gold away being the preserve perhaps of science and technology, as you might suspect, there is a little bit more of variety than that. So you'll see that engineering, IT and applied sciences in this pie chart only takes up about 3% of the open access content that we saw last year. Conversely, behavioural sciences and public health and social care took over 40% of that pie. 2013 year to date, not much variation really. I think the biggest difference is in our politics, geography and area studies list. So you will see that that proportion has ramped up, and we have seen a decrease in behavioural sciences, public health and social care. Now, the 2013 statistics, about a quarter of that content has come from within the UK. So we do think that there's an element of the RC UK mandate being in play there. Certainly a lot of the institutions that we've been working with, they're very keen to apportion the RC UK block grant money equally across S&T and SSAH. Okay, so moving on to the meat of the talk, the transition issues. Firstly, from an operational standpoint, I think the key point to make, and I know it's an obvious one, but I will just make it, is that we are facing a new model. So we're moving on from the subscription paradigm, where the vast amount of business was conducted via a subscription agent. So for ourselves, it's about 85%. We're moving on from that to a much more complex relationship, often with an individual, and that is for the supply of services in exchange usually for a fee, the article publishing charge. So we have an environment where there are lots of micropayments, there's a lot more admin, there's a lot more complexity. I'm going to touch on APC mechanisms in a little bit more detail shortly, but we do often get asked, in terms of our subscription portfolio, why don't we just convert more titles to pure open access? And I think that is a legitimate question to ask, but we actually, evidence suggests that if we converted these titles to the gold open access, the pure open access model, they would actually become unsustainable. That's partly because we would lose the other sources of revenue that I touched on earlier, but also I think it's because a lot of these journals have high rejection rates, there's a lot of back office costs involved. So the APC model makes it very difficult to cover those back office costs. Reporting is something that operationally we're very interested in. I must admit that we are doing a lot of work to clean up our data. There's more work that needs to be done, and it's great that there are projects like FundRef and ORCID in the mix. I think that's really going to help. At the institutional level, hopefully we'll see Ringgold coming in a little bit more to the fore in terms of having consistent identifiers for institutions. So essentially what we're dealing with is we're dealing with a lot more complexity, a lot more players, in terms of authors and researchers, a lot more cost. From a strategic standpoint, so some of the points I touched on before are still relevant here. There's been lots of talk about funding and business models, and I think Caroline's talk just before lunch gave us all a lot of food for thought. But certainly still in social sciences, arts, humanities, we are uncertain as to how this is all going to pan out. The funding for Gold Open Access simply isn't there. So perhaps a new model, perhaps a subsidy model is the way to go. We'll have to see. Perhaps controversially, I'll say that open access isn't yet a grassroots movement. I'm not just saying that. We have got evidence to support that from an author survey that we conducted at the earlier part of this year. And as I said again, we are a service industry. We need to adapt to suit the needs of researchers, and we're not yet clear how big a part open access is going to play in terms of those changing needs. I think you're all well aware of subject differentials. Just a couple of points really to touch on there. We've already talked a little bit about licensing, and the third-party content issue came up, but this is something we frankly already grapple with within our subscription titles, but I think open access sort of ramps it up a little bit. It's going to be very difficult for us to negotiate with third parties to obtain permission for their material to be put into, for example, a CC BY work. So let's say we have EMI and they have some sheet music. We or the author would like to use that in a work that is to be published under CC BY. It's a very tricky situation, and it is, to be honest, it is a bit of a can of worms that we have been discussing over the past year. I think the other element as well is that the CC BY license perhaps is very well suited to science and technology, where intellectual property can be protected by patent. Intellectual property in social sciences, arts and humanities does tend to reside more within the article, and there is some discomfort amongst researchers about making their IP freely available for all to reuse. Skipping on, as time is running short, I just wanted to highlight perhaps a few dichotomies that we've encountered over the past year. Licensing is one. So, I think the principles of the Creative Commons Attribution License are admirable. But that said, as I've mentioned, there are researchers who are not really happy with using that license. I do think actually that maybe an element of this is that they're compelled to use it by mandates. Certainly evidence from PLOS and BMC shows that they haven't really had any pushback from authors, and they've been publishing under the CC BY license for years. Perhaps that's because they're more in the preserve of biomedical science, but definitely a bit of a tension there, I think. Other speakers have talked about green open access and the sort of the Ouroboros dilemma. It itself is dependent on another model to survive, and that currently is the subscription model. So some issues there. And I've already talked a little bit about efficiencies. I just want to have a little bit of a moan, so please excuse me. But I don't know if any of you have encountered this as well. One of the real issues that we've been grappling with is actually defining what on earth is open access. So we get to a stage where we think, okay, this is what it is. Okay, brilliant, we're going to communicate that. This is our understanding. And then somebody comes along and says, no, you've got it wrong. This isn't it. So I just wanted to throw up here some of the myriad terms that we have to deal with. We've put together a short open access motion graphic that we're going to be releasing soon. And hopefully we've tried to boil it down and make it as simple as possible while showing the various nuances that can be in play. But my boss likes to call this a profusion of confusion. And I would agree with them. So I would advocate for some work to be done there. Okay, so what progress have we made? Well, I'm going to focus on sort of the external element first, and then some of the more practical internal points. Externally, we've been doing a lot of interaction with our various stakeholders, societies, editors, librarians. We've also had numerous meetings with funders and policymakers, both here in the UK and within Europe. We've had focus groups, we've held workshops. I've had a lot of conversations on the phone with people, institutional repository managers, librarians, people who are at the front line in terms of actually getting the RC UK block grant implemented. Some of you in this room, hello. We've been doing a lot of marketing and social media, and really, frankly, the reason for us doing this is actually to try and inform authors and researchers a little bit more about what open access means. There is an extraordinary amount of confusion out there, and we have hundreds of queries on a daily basis from authors actually asking us what open access means and what the implications are for them. I know that's something that many of you from institutions have also been dealing with. We were very keen to become members of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, and that membership was confirmed early this year. They did have quite strict membership criteria in place, but we were happy to adjust our policies accordingly. We've also recently started sponsorship of the Directory of Open Access Journals, something, again, we're very proud to support DOAJ. I've mentioned already our author survey. I don't really have time to dwell on it in any great detail today, but just to show that we are actually conducting market research as well. This author survey, we had just under 15,000 responses from our author community. For those of you who are interested in finding out more, please visit our website. It's available there under Creative Commons licensing, as are a lot of associated supplements. But that really has helped to inform our policies. We've also put together a white paper which was focused more at the library community, and that was asking quite an interesting question. When librarians are dealing with a flood of free online content, because there is a lot more free online content out there now, how do they catalogue it? How do they validate its quality? What is the future in terms of dealing with this content and engaging with it and making the most of it? I've already mentioned in terms of green open access our embargo pilot, our zero embargo pilot in library and information science, but we've also contributed data to a British Academy half-life study, which has been funded by HEFGE, and this is looking at article usage half-lives by discipline. Some of our initial data anecdotally are quite interesting. So we've seen that half-lives in philosophy, for example, are a lot shorter than those in material science. We think that's because monograph publication is still the default option for philosophy researchers, but I think that's really, really telling, and we're really looking forward to the outcomes of that study. The American Publishers Association, we understand, are also going to be releasing the outcomes of a similar study that they've conducted, and I think that's going to be in the next week or so. As the last point, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but we are participating in Chorus. For those of you who aren't familiar with Chorus, it is a publisher-led initiative. It is designed to fulfill the aims of the Office of Science and Technology Policy's mandate back in February of 2013. So this was over in the US, and they mandated federal research agencies to develop plans to allow public access to their funded research outputs within 12 months. So we're very keen to see how Chorus develops. On a technical standpoint, so we've been doing an awful lot of collaboration with other publishers. So we are working on things like Chorus, as I've already mentioned, ORCID. There's also something called Prospect, which is all about text and data mining and achieving standardization in that respect. Internally, we've put together a project team. We've been meeting pretty regularly for over the past 18 months, dealing with a lot of the practical aspects of a transition to OA, but also some of the more qualitative questions, perhaps. You know, where is this going to lead? How do we measure impact? What is the future research output going to be? We've been doing a lot of process improvements. So I talked earlier about the increased complexity, and certainly we've benefited from having strong internal infrastructure that we are able to tweak and amend. That is not to say that has been painless, but you know, with a lot of internal training and a lot of sort of process refinement and improvement, I think we are really getting there. We do offer open licenses for Gold Open Access publication. So we do offer the attribution license. We also offer the non-commercial variant, and we offer a license to publish, which is based on Creative Commons non-commercial no derivatives, but it allows for text and data mining, and that's something we're perfectly happy with. And our decisions around those licenses were partly informed by a membership of a WASPA, but also the responses from authors to our survey. We've improved our online presence, so we now have a dedicated open access area on our website, and we are continually trying to improve that. I think a big point point on the to-do list for us is actually improving the discoverability of hybrid open access content. Speaking of hybrid open access content, we now offer a gold open access option on over 95% of our journals. As a quick sidebar, we have had a green OA option on all of our journals since 2003, but we have now enrolled the vast majority of our titles into that hybrid program so that we can give the authors the choice of gold, green, or subscription. In line with that, of course, we are acutely aware of the double dipping question, and we did release our subscription adjustment policy that is freely available on our website, and that talks about what steps we're taking to make sure that we don't double dip. I think that said, the double dipping question is an extremely complex one. It's very difficult to unpick, and there's still work to be done there. Focusing a little bit on our APC system. So we actually have, since 2006, we've worked with RightsLink, who have an APC mechanism in place. Last year, after some internal discussion, we decided to create a supporting APC workflow. Now, I will admit, this is manual. It's run out of our customer service department. The reason that we set it up was partly pragmatic. We weren't quite sure what the requirements were going to be. We needed a quick solution. We needed to be able to adopt our offering to the requirements of authors and institutions. It's also been a great learning process, and that was one of the reasons why we set it up. I think our knowledge has increased exponentially over the past year, and it will be extremely informative as we look towards an automated system in the future. Certainly it has helped us deal with our open access membership institutions, so many of those have prepayment accounts with us, some of whom are in this room, and I do hope that you found that it's made life a little bit easier for you. Of course, a manual system is always going to be less efficient than an automated system, let's be frank. We also, on our side, we have a lot more admin involved, and I think that's partly because of the number of author queries that we see coming through, still quite basic queries, so we are, as I say, doing a lot to try and inform authors of the options available. In the future, of course, we want not just the streamlined author process, but we want to be much more transparent. We want to have data provided on research funders and APC funders. We do want to provide reporting functionality as well. Very interested to hear Damien talking earlier about PLOS ones, ALMs, and reporting. And I think the thing that I'd like to highlight really is that within TNF, we do leave the choice of open access or subscription up to the author. So time is running a little bit short, but I want to touch briefly on our new open access division, as mentioned by Charlie. Cogent was formally launched at the WASPA meeting in September. This is going to be a pure open access division, so they will share many of the philosophies of Taylor and Francis Group, but as a pure open access division, we hope that they're going to be able to experiment, to innovate, and to take risks, perhaps risks that we can't take because of our portfolio of 1,800 journals which we need to support. Cogent is going to be very much focused on publishing journals of a broad scope, so the mega journal concept. We have a few projects in the pipeline already. It's going to hopefully complement our activities. We're going to continue with our open access journals portfolio, focusing more on niche titles across social sciences and science and technology. So exciting times. So we've got a big to-do list. I've already moaned a little bit about open access terminology, and I would advocate that as a group or as an industry, there is some consistency there in terms of the terms used. We're very keen to continue working with funders, with policymakers, with all of the stakeholders in the process. The author survey that I touched on, we want to have a follow-up next year just to see if attitudes are changing. There was talk earlier about the public library initiative, so we have signed up to that. And I think the last point really on this slide to talk about is the cost-benefit analyses. So I was at an illuminating meeting last week here in London, and there was lots of call for an actual formal cost-benefit analysis around open access. I know that's something that the Finch Group touched on, but I don't think they had the opportunity to delve into that in any great detail. But it would be very, very informative. Just finishing with a slide of Brimham Rocks from my home county of Yorkshire. Hooray. Hello to anybody who's from Yorkshire. But you know, I just want to finish with a few questions really. I'm not going to go into all of the points on this slide, but there's been a lot of talk about the publishing industry needed to be torn down and started again. Of course, I would advocate against that, but I also think that the industry has been able to adapt in the past, and perhaps the rate of change has been comparable with a geological age, but I think open access has really catalysed change, it's really catalysed innovation. It has been a good thing, and its influence has been felt across all of our business, not just the purely open access elements. We've got lots of interesting questions ahead of us around grey literature. Open data has already been talked about. In this world where content is going to be much more accessible, which is wonderful, I think we have some interesting questions around impact. How do we measure the impact of research? How do we get the public to engage more with the literature? Are lay summaries the way to go? Do we need to revisit how we write an article? And the sort of jumping around a little bit here, but I think we need to be mindful in this environment about learned societies and smaller publishers. Obviously, Taylor and Francis, as a large publisher, we have a lot of resources at our disposal, which has helped us adapt to this new environment. But we do need to be mindful that part of the strength of the publishing industry, if I can say that, is its diversity. So we need to be mindful there. So essentially, I just hark back to my previous point that perhaps it's not a transition that we're in yet. It's this third age, this mixed economy, but open access has had and will continue to have positive influences. Okay, thank you.